Hello viewers, welcome back to yet another edition of the Women's Show here on Civic Space TV. Today we're celebrating Women's Day. This is the 8th of March 2022. Happy Women's Day to all the women out there. And to celebrate this day with us, we have the Executive Director of FOWODE, Patricia Munabi. We are here to discuss the achievements, failures, how far we have come, what is the way forward, what are the gains and the losses we have made throughout these years since 1995. I know for a fact that FOWODE came out of the Women's Caucus of the Constituent Assembly that made sure that we had the 1995 Constitution. And in the 1995 Constitution was one of Uganda's first constitution to recognize women's rights. We were given at least a good percentage of rights that were due to us as women. And the FOWODE was born out of the Women's Caucus that pushed so hard. So since 1995, do you feel that we have achieved what the Women's Caucus envisioned?
Happy Women's Day to our viewers. Today we are here to celebrate Women's Day, which falls within the overall Women's Month that we celebrate as women across the globe. Yes. So back to your question, Marion. The Forum for Women in Democracy, as you rightly said, was born out of the 1994-1995 constitution-making process. Yes. During the Constituent Assembly, a group of 8 women came together with an agenda of seeing how the Constitution could be made gender responsive. Up to that point, women were very few in the legislature. And so they realized that in order to get more women into public decision-making spaces, into decision-making spaces, it was important that through the Constitution, which was a critical document, they saw how they could ensure that the clauses of the Constitution were gender responsive, so that more women could benefit from the public sphere, from the private sphere, from the economic sphere, and so on. So these 8 women came together and formed a special interest groups caucus that was comprised of not only women, but also workers, the youth, and people with disabilities who were all represented in the assembly. And they brought together some male champions within the assembly who were ready to walk with them the journey of advancing women's rights and gender equality. So as the Constitution was being debated clause by clause, the women came together, reflected, did research, strategized, and saw how they could work together with their male allies to advance a gender agenda on the floor of the assembly. Now, they didn't work alone within the Constituent Assembly. They relied on academic institutions. So the caucus worked very closely with the School of Women and Gender Studies now. They worked with national women's rights organizations like FIDA, like NAWU, to do research so that once they got onto the floor of the assembly, they had the evidence that they could then use to advance the arguments that they were making on the floor of Parliament. So as you rightly say, we came out of 1995 with what was hailed on the African continent as one of the most gender responsive constitutions. The Constitution came with affirmative action, which meant that more women, more youth, more workers, more people with disability were going to get into decision-making spaces. It also came with concrete articles on women's rights. And so we see articles around women's rights to land getting into the Constitution and, general framing that gave us a foundation to continue the work around ensuring that women and girls' rights, issues, needs were part of the conversations that were going on as policies were being thought about, as laws were being debated, and so on. So after the CA, these 8 women who led the way during the Constituent Assembly thought it was important to continue the work that they had started in the CA through an organization.
Yes.
And that's how Forum for Women in Democracy was born in 1995.
Congratulations.
Yes, thank you. So that is part of our history. We are part of our political history.
Yes.
And that's why everything that we continue to do focuses on democracy and governance, and how do we get women into the spaces, how do we get them to continue to be effective and you know, advance the gender agenda, how do we enable them to continue to stand out of the crowd, be bold and value-driven in the context in which we are working while advancing the gender and women's rights agenda.
Yes. But have you achieved that? Do you think that what they envisioned has come true? In terms of, let us see, now when we're talking about affirmative action, affirmative action, we have seen it applied in the education system, we have seen it applied in the political space, you know, councils everywhere, they're saying women this, women that. It has even gone to the boardrooms of companies. You know, how many women do you have? You're not being gender sensitive. There have also been arguments, you know, that these women that we are putting in these spaces, for example, parliament, they don't seem to have agency of their own accord. That they seem to, for lack of a better word, wallflowers, you know. They are there to show that, we as government, we are very gender responsive. But really, beyond that, they do not have, they can't make their own decisions beyond what the men who put them in power tell them to do, you know. When we go to women MPs, there have been arguments that you see if we remove the women seats, that there would be no woman in parliament.
There would be few women.
Oh, okay. Few women in parliament. Correction. I think there are now 11 on the non, you know, the
affirmative action
no. On the
non-affirmative action seat, which is the direct seat.
Exactly. But also there's this thing of these women's seats seem to affirm the thing that women appear weaker, you know, a woman MP and a male counterpart who has come through the direct seat don't seem to have the same power, at least before in front of their constituency. We have had these things of, you know, women being told, let us go to, you go to the woman's seat, because it is the woman's seat. So instead of getting women into male-dominated spaces, which was what affirmative action was supposed to be, at least in the political space, it has created another division, another othering, you know. You know, it has created another, we are together but separated, you know, we should stick to our own lanes. What would you say about that?
Well, you have asked many questions in one. Sorry. I want us to begin by celebrating, because we have come a long way. I mean, before the 1995 Constitution, we had 14% of women in parliament. We now have about 35% of women in parliament. So we need to celebrate the fact that we now have women in the space. Let me also remind us that affirmative action was put in place to address the imbalances that had been created by history, by culture, and by tradition. Now, when you look at these three elements, these are things that we are still dealing with today. I mean, when you go out into the communities, and going back to your reference of go back to the women's seat, and even supporting women to get into leadership in the first place, we are still dealing with history. We are still dealing with issues of culture. We are dealing with issues of patriarchy. We are a highly patriarchal society. And so, yes, women have got into the space because of affirmative action, but we need to do much more to continue to change attitudes, cultures, and this is a long journey. So I would like us to begin by celebrating and saying affirmative action provided that opportunity for women to get in. Before, there were hardly any women, so we celebrate those numbers. We also celebrate the women that have dared to stand on the direct seats, the 11 you're now talking about. In fact, the number went down from the previous parliament. We were previously at 14. It has now gone down to 11. So we need to celebrate those women. We need to celebrate the women who have dared to stand for president. You know, Mama Miria Obote, Honorable Betty Kamia, Maureen Charia,
Yes.
we have Nancy Kalembe in the last election. It takes brevity to go into those positions, knowing the woman's place in society, knowing the context in which we operate, and the different hindrances that there are to women who step into that space.
Yes.
Now, going beyond the numbers of women at the national level, because of affirmative action, we have more than 40% of women on local government seats. We need to celebrate that.
Yes, yes.
Yeah, both at the district council level and also at the sub-county level. So we are doing well in terms of numbers of the women in the political space. Let us go a bit off the political space and go, for example, to women in land administration bodies.
Yes.
We have 34% of women in land administration bodies. That is important because land is a critical resource. And we know that many times women do not have control over land. They do not own land, they only access. So it's important that we have women in those spaces so that, you know, when issues of land rights, especially that relates to women, come into the space of the committees on which they sit, they are able to, you know, support and understand where the woman is coming from because, once again, culture continues to debar women from owning, controlling land, and so on. Now, we talked about beyond numbers. These numbers have translated into having an impact on legislation, on budgets. Look, when we got these women into the space, women's issues became critical within the legislatures. The men and women began to think about the importance of listening to what the needs of women and girls are in communities so that they could get into laws and eventually into budgets. I mean, think about the Domestic Violence Act.
Yes.
We have a Domestic Violence Act in place. We have the Anti-Female Genital Mutilation Act in place. We have a Succession Act in place. We have the Human Rights Enforcement Act in place.
Yes.
You can say human rights is broad, but I mean, we are all humans, women and men. I know there has been a back and forth around the marriage bill, but still it goes back to what I mentioned earlier. History, tradition, culture, all these things come in, and the individuals that we send into parliaments are individuals that are coming from a context where they have been socialized and are therefore affected even as they debate on some of these issues. We have the Public Finance and Management Act. The Public Finance and Management Act brought into the law a certificate for gender and equity. We are the first country in the world to have such a provision in law. So it mandates all ministries, departments, and agencies to ensure that gender and equity issues have been integrated in their plans and in their budgets. So it is to say that we have made progress. At least we have the laws in place. The question comes when we get to implementation. And that's where we say progress has been made, but a lot more needs to be done. There are still so many challenges out there. And it is these challenges that drive us to say more needs to be done by our governments if we are to achieve sustainable development, if we are to achieve an eco future, if we are to achieve a sustainable future. I mean, look at sexual and gender-based violence. Uganda is among the worst countries in the world in terms of SGBV. Every 1 in 5 women aged between 15 to 49 has experienced sexual or emotional or physical violence. This is in comparison to less than 1 in 10 men. So what does that tell you? We need to do much more there. We have a very high teenage pregnancy rate, 25%. Again, we are doing badly in terms of the global, the global figures. So 25% is unacceptable. We need to do more. When you look at maternal mortality, 336 women dying per 100,000 live births. That is unacceptable. The numbers are too high. We can't afford to have all these women dying while giving birth to children. Yes, we have talked about having a land act that was intended to improve women's access to land. But once again, culture comes in, tradition comes in, and women continue to face obstacles in trying to access and control land. Less than 30% of women actually own land in Uganda. Let us go to the economic sphere. Only 1 in 3 businesses are owned by women. And yet, when you look at where those women are, it's in the informal sector. Therefore, how much are they actually bringing into their pockets, into their households, and so on? So, yes, we have made progress. A lot more needs to be done. So just to emphasize again that the numbers have been able to deliver something for us in terms of law. Implementation may be weak because there is still a lot of work to do in terms of conscientizing on issues of gender, on issues of women's rights, on why it is important to have equality for both men and women. And this is a journey we need to walk and be ready to walk for some time, because it doesn't take a short time to change some of these things. So we have made some gains. We still have more work to do. We need everyone to come on board, both men and women, as we walk this journey. Can I also add that when we talk about patriarchy, it's not only about the men, it's also about the women. Because as I said earlier, we've all grown up within a particular context. We've been socialized in a particular way. We've all grown up believing in a particular religion. And what does that religion say about the woman's place? And so on. So it is a journey that we are walking. We need to work with both men and women and see how we eventually get to an equal future. I just want to give an example of the marriage and divorce bill then. The name has changed. There's been a lot of negotiation around that bill, because many times when you ask about the laws that are in place, people keep saying, but how come you have failed to see through the marriage and divorce bill? Or the sexual offences bill. What did it come out with, and you know, all that? But it once again goes back to our cultures and where we are coming from and how we have been socialized and so on. And we need to get both men and women on this journey if we are to be able to achieve an equal and sustainable future.
After all, they control the instruments of power. You cannot leave them out. But just to take it to a few things, I just want to bring out a few things that you pointed out. And for example, when we talk about land rights, and you have made it clear the culture and our history hinders in most ways women's access to land. But we have also seen that government and parliament has tried to push, at least we are seeing gains, even through, I would say, judicial activism, that we will see in cases like Chigongo versus Chigongo, recognizing contribution of the woman to the home, and therefore what she's entitled to, whether she can stay in her matrimonial home or not. We have also seen the Land Act, you know, the fact that you cannot get a mortgage on a house without the woman having a say in it, especially
spousal consent.
Yes, spousal consent, especially if it's a matrimonial home. We have also seen that, you know, the Succession Act that is in right now, and that will soon be replaced by the Succession Bill, if all goes well, if the president assents to it, whereby, you know, still the woman is given a semblance of, you know, how can I say it, your contribution is recognized, you know. And for a long time we have talked about unpaid care work and how most women suffer because of that. But just to, do you think these efforts are enough, especially in seeing that women have some semblance of right in the land that they toil? So we all know that women make up the biggest percentage, especially in the agricultural sector.
More than 70%.
Yes, but they don't own the land.
Yes.
So are these efforts that government is making, are they going far enough? Do they need to do more? What do we need to do in order to get women to get value for their land? Because we know at the end of the day, if you don't own the land, you get evicted. Someone can come and just burn your crops. And we have seen this with widows who have been kicked off their land, you know. Even wives whose men are still alive, you know. He just wants another woman, so off you go, you know. We've seen this in clans, you know, when they're inheriting the land must go to the what? To the men. So do you think that government is going far enough?
Well, I think it is two-way. It is government, but it's also about the people.
The people.
Yeah, and that's why the issue of raising awareness and sensitizing and getting citizens, both men and women, to understand why it's important for women to actually not only access but own land is very, very important. So I think in terms of legislation, we have achieved a lot in, you know, spousal consent that you talked about, improving women's access to land and so on. And I think the law is in place.
Yeah.
We now need to go to the communities and, you know, raise awareness of what is in the law in the first place, but also begin or continue to chip at the culture, you know, the patriarchy, because it is those things that debar the men, for example, from giving more land to their women and so on. We have had instances, for example, in some of our work where girls have been dispossessed of land because of the perception, again, that the girls will get married and go to another community, so how can we be giving them land? And there's a particular instance in Amuria district where girls had gotten married. They got into those relationships and they did not work and they needed to come back home.
Yes.
And the parents were saying, but there is nowhere for you to go. You have no property here. You got married, so please go and sort out yourselves out.
Yes.
And one of the strategies that we use in our work is that of using male champions for gender equality.
Yes. And
when they heard about this case, they actually got into conversation with the whole family, eventually brought the whole clan in. And this family actually had a lot of land. And finally, because of the conversation and the male champion helping them to understand why it was important that these girls were actually given a piece of the land so that they could be able to get a livelihood and sustain themselves, they actually got a piece of land and gave it to the girls. So sometimes it's about having this conversation with the communities, with the citizens. We need to bring the cultural and religious leaders on board so that together we can walk this journey. Because we all know that once a woman is empowered, it has an impact, not only on her, but on the family, on the community, and it eventually seeps into national development because, I mean, for example, if you go into agriculture, you're earning an income, you're paying taxes, so the government also benefits at the end of the day. So for me, the biggest issue is dealing with culture and tradition and patriarchy. I think we have the laws in place. Maybe much more needs to be done in terms of the law, but how do we get down to the citizens? These men and women that are stuck in the patriarchal context and, you know, begin to have these conversations and see how we can get out of that situation. The other important thing is that it is important that women are economically empowered, so they're also able to, you know, buy their own land. But we all know that land is expensive. Women are usually poor because of their gender roles. They are thinking of the practical needs. How do I put food on my table for my children, for my family? So how do we then go into the economic sphere and put more money into women's pockets so that they can be able to buy their own land? And that's why, for example, programs like the Uganda Women's Entrepreneurship Program is a good program by the government, because once again, government is acknowledging that women are on the periphery of the economy, that it is important that women have more money in their pockets because of what it does to families, to communities, and so on. And so such programs are good because they put more money into women's pockets, and once the other issues within the context are dealt with, then it will probably lead to more women having money, more women being able to buy and own land in their own individual capacities.
Thank you for that. Very interesting, I would say. But also the other thing I would want to pick, so from your earlier conversation, when we're talking about the patriarchy, how religion comes
And
into
culture.
socialize people and discrimination against women. I think we saw that really come out during this pandemic, or the aftermath of the pandemic, whereby we were faced with the crisis of teenage pregnancies, teenage mothers who wanted to go back to school. And we saw religious leaders come out and say, you know, we are not going to have these immoral girls in our schools anymore. And you saw the Ministry of Education struggling so hard, you know, to sensitize people on why they should allow girls back. But some of the things that that came out, and I think these are critical issues. First of all, they talked about the health care that these girls would need, you know. How would teachers are not qualified to take care of teenage or pregnancies or pregnant teenagers.
Yes.
What message will it show to
the other
people
students?
Around, yes, to the students around them. But then also the burden of childbearing and carrying a child. You know, most of these girls, they're kilometers away from their schools and the next health center. So you're asking schools that are struggling to keep their doors open to also improve their school dispensaries, you know, and maybe also modify their living quarters because they need to make space to take care. But also you're asking them to modify their diet, you know. But and the argument was, but as a government, how you are pulling out in subsidizing us to be able to cope with this situation. What are your thoughts around there? Should we allow, probably after seeing all that, should we allow teenage mothers to be in school, or pregnant teenagers?
First of all, you know, COVID really did us bad.
It did a number,
when you think about the teenage pregnancy, domestic violence, loss of livelihoods, it was really bad.
Yeah, it was terrible.
And for me, the more concerning thing is we are thinking about today, but the impact in the future is going to be dire. So think about all these teenage mothers that we have. What does the future hold for them? Many of them have dropped out of school. So what does that mean in terms of a sustainable future? Now that we are talking about Women's Day and the importance of a sustainable future. Because what kind of employment will they have? How much money will come into their pockets? We are talking of issues of unpaid care work. And most of these girls going to fall back into the unpaid care work domain that we are struggling with today. So COVID really did us bad as not only as a country, but as the globe. Now, I keep asking myself, so you're talking about these teenage girls who got pregnant. How come there's no conversation about who got them pregnant? Where are these men and boys who got these people pregnant? And why should a girl be disadvantaged? And yet, if, for example, it's a boy that got her pregnant, he is in school and his life seems to be normal. So we need to bring the perpetrators, if I could call them that, into the conversation.
We should expel the boys also. That's a solution.
That may not be a solution. We need to bring that conversation to the fore and also see how we deal with that. That said, the ministry has in place that policy of keeping the girl in school. But I think what we need to also be talking about is beyond the policy, what needs to be done. When that policy was put in place, the issues you've been talking about how does the school handle a teenage pregnant girl? Are the teachers ready to deal with these girls? Are the other students ready to be within this space that has pregnant, girls? And how? So there is a policy gap actually in terms of ensuring that the school environment and all that needs to be in place for this girl to go back into the school system is actually there. So I think the ministry still needs to do more to address that policy gap so that even as they're saying, keep the girls in school, you know, all these other issues are addressed. That said, going back to religion and culture and the things I talked about earlier, we need to keep these conversations going, even with the religious leaders, the cultural leaders, and so on. Because at the end of the day, it's to the benefit of all of us that both girls and boys remain in school. Yes.
So now to switch on other topics that we talked about. So despite the pandemic, there were also other glooming world crises taking place. And one of them was climate change.
Yes.
Somehow when we went into the pandemic, the environment improved. I remember,
there was not a lot of emissions on there.
I remember scientists saying that, you see, we should have more lockdowns.
Oh gosh. You need to weigh cost benefit.
But we know for a fact that many women, especially in our Uganda, are so vulnerable to climate change, given the fact they're the ones who till the land, like we had said, 70% of women are in the agriculture sector. So if there is a drought, they're the first people hit. That means they won't be able to feed their children, but also won't be able to feed the whole family. But again, even when they are the most vulnerable, they are rarely at the decision-making table.
Yes.
I mean, okay, besides the fact that we Africa as a community, as a continent, is not really on the decision-making table of who emits what. But even when we talk about other women, like how many times, apart from maybe the common faces we used to see, now that she's off, you know, the German chancellor and being part of the G8s who sit around. But really women are missing
on the table.
In this conversation. So I'd like you to take us through, how does climate change affect women? First of all, for our audience who think that women, how does women connect with climate change? You know, people want to put gender in
everything.
You know? But also, what are the ways that we can bring women into this conversation? That even when they're vulnerable, they might not be as powerful. Like, what is the importance of bringing them in this conversation, and how can we bring them into this conversation?
So first of all, climate change affects women in a big way. First of all, because women form 74 to 76% of our agricultural workforce. Women depend a lot on the land. And so changing seasons, changing weather, the fact that women are, you know, planting crops to be able to feed families, to be able to generate an income, affects them in a very big way. I mean, if you come to our own Uganda, the way the seasons have been changing.
Terrible.
So the women plant maize. Instead of rain, we have the sun. The crops die. That has an effect on the family because they are not able to feed families. And so on. So women, because of their gender roles, are actually disproportionately affected by climate change. So it's important that they are aware about these conversations and that they also know that they have a role to play in mitigating climate change. Think about our women in the rural area. Most of them use firewood. So they are going out into the villages and cutting trees and cutting shrubs and cutting all because they need firewood to cook for the family, right? Are they even aware that they are making a contribution to denigrating the climate? Maybe not, because for them, they are looking for firewood it's their way of life. Go look for firewood to make a meal for your family. So we need to raise their awareness. But even beyond that, the firewood, the cooking, and what that translates to in terms of diseases, the non-communicable diseases that women are getting because of the smoke that they are inhaling, you know, they may not necessarily think it is an issue, they may not know, but it is an issue. So you can see that because of women's gender roles, they are being affected because of issues around climate change. But also think about, for example, access to clean and safe water. Yeah. It's also a climate change issue.
Yeah, it is.
Because drought, no water, longer distances.
But also toxic water.
Toxic water, you know, so it is a big deal. Women need to pay attention to climate change. I think most of our citizens at the local level in the rural areas are not necessarily aware that they are impacting on the environment in a negative way. So we need to reach out to them. But as we reach out to them, they need solutions. Yeah. So if you say, I should not use firewood,
what should I use?
What should I use? And that's where, for example, the government comes in. For example, we had a whole project on solar. I don't know where that ended.
Really?
As a country, we had a whole, there's a budget process where there was a whole debate around funds being allocated to solar energy. I mean, this could be a solution for women to have improved lighting, for example, and not use the tadoba and the lamp, which bring fumes and so on.
Yes.
That could be a solution, but once again, government needs to come in and play a role.
Yeah.
If you're talking about biogas, the women need education. How does it work?
Biogas,
they need a bit of startup capital, maybe, to be able to acquire the initial equipment that they need. That's where, once again, government comes in. Can the government look for partners that are interested in this whole climate change agenda to inject some funds and work with the women so that, you know, some of these things can change. So I think that's where government comes in. But also going back to the issue of women in decision-making, we are lacking women on the decision-making tables.
Yes.
But also, as we have the women on the decision-making tables, we need to connect with the grassroots so that we have the voices, the realities of the women that are faced with this climate change dilemma, speaking to the decision makers so that what they are putting on the table are the realities of the women who live them day to day.
Back to the pandemic, I would also say that we came alive, and now we're talking about, you know, climate change, but I think also the other conversation has become the digital space.
Wow.
You know, the pandemic opened up so many things. It was a Pandora's box and really a wake-up call for us. So suddenly we had to face this man-made force called digital space, and we had to use it. Now imagine us, you know, a bit privileged, maybe you have access to internet and what, but you know that most women do not have access. But on top of not having access, it seems like the digital space has also become another space where women's rights are being violated, you know, online harassment and all that. So those things we know and we're alive to. But I want to bring another conversation that is happening, and perhaps you could help shed light. So I'm bringing all these things. They're happening in our country. I want this Women's Day as we reflect on them. So because of all the challenges that I've said before, so government and some legislators find it important to put in place cyber harassment policies or bills or laws. You know, but then there is a conversation in our country today that while we admit that perpetrators are using this space to shame and victimize women, spreading their nudes, trolling, basically making the online space a very toxic space. But on the other hand, it is also being used, these laws are being used to curtail freedoms, you know, to also victimize women for speaking up. I have interacted with sexual harassment cases whereby the perpetrators actually sued women who went up to talk about
the case.
About their cases, they were telling their stories, you know, with the whole Me Too movement thing, and they were sued for defamation. Where is the balance between how do we protect this space and make it safe for women to participate in, because we have seen the effects of when we participate in this global, in this digital space, with the Me Too movement and the Black Lives Matter, how it can be a force.
A good mobilization space.
Exactly. But then on the other side, we cannot also ignore how it is being misused. So where do we balance?
Wow. So, first of all, to agree with you that yes, digital is good. The digital only reaches, I can say, a few people, because when you interact with the woman in the districts, in the sub-counties, in the villages, many of them won't have your smartphone. They'll have a kabiriti, the small phone, mostly for communication, for radio. They won't have your smartphone. So clearly with the digital technology age, some people are being left behind. And we need to think about how do we bring them on board, because there is no turning back. So how do we bring them on board? The digital era has also, indeed, as you've said, opened up the space and enabled us to learn. There are many things we learn through the digital space, but it has also been a very good mobilization space for causes. So for example, whereas, for example, in the work that we do, having physical meetings gives you a particular number of people. Through the online space, you're able to reach many more people with your cause and mobilize them and get onto an agenda. I think it's important that even as we have these debates about the opening up of the space and these laws that are coming into place, that we emphasize the importance of awareness on roles, responsibilities, and rights. And this is basic civic education. To say, if I'm playing my role, or if I'm taking advantage of the rights that I have, how do I ensure that I'm being responsible and that I'm also not encroaching on other people's rights? I think that is the basic conversation we need to have, so that, you know, we are using the space for the right causes and we are not stepping on other people's toes and also violating their rights. I think that is what it should be.
Cool. Yeah, maybe we find that maybe it's debatable. It still goes swing, depending on what people are saying. The violation of rights have been.
Yeah.
But just because we're out of time, I just wanted you to give us the message that you have for women out there on this Women's Day. What would you want them to know? But also, I cannot fail to speak to our political space right now. While you're giving those parting shots, I would like you to maybe address the women on what is going on. So recently, we have seen the talk of torture. We saw a woman who was taken into a drone, you know. Up to now, no one knows who she is and where she was taken. We have seen a lot of women lose their sons and daughters in this whole disaster. And, you know, whether it is political persecution, there's a lot of insecurity in our country right now in general. There seems to also be an acceptance, an effort to normalize what should not be normalized, you know. All this brutality and torture, it's like, if you belong to a certain class of people, it is justified to beat you up and no one can say anything about it. You know, the world will just look on. Even the judges will refuse to give you a pass to get medical treatment, you know. It's like everyone is complicit in this space of brutality. And we know that when it comes to violence, the people who are affected the most are the women. So what is your message to that, and also intertwine it with your message for the people, for the women on Women's Day?
It's really sad, some of the things that are happening. When you look at our landscape, I mean, in the recent past, the talk of, not only in the very recent past, for quite some time, conversations around torture, disappearances, kidnaps, and all that. That is really sad. As women are peaceful beings ordinarily, and violence in such instances also affects women disproportionately because we are mothers, we are wives, and so on.
So wives asking for their husbands to come back, and they were paid off. Yes,
we are working within a very difficult, difficult context, and really to say that as we think about a sustainable future, as a country, as citizens, we need to think critically about the importance of justice, the importance of equality, the importance of democracy. And I'd also like to say that at the Forum for Women in Democracy, we've been thinking seriously about these things over the past few years. And as I mentioned earlier, we have said a lot has been achieved, but much more needs to be done. And that's why this year, as we talk about gender equality today for a sustainable future, at FOWODE, we are launching the Imara Women's Center. The Imara Women's Center is an initiative of FOWODE. It is to anchor our work on the advancement of women's rights, but it's a contribution to the women's movement because we are all working together to see this equal and sustainable future. And unless the gender gaps that we talked about earlier are addressed, we will not see this equal future. And so at FOWODE, we are saying that through this center, we will continue to have conversations about the importance of justice, the importance of democracy, the importance of equality. How do we as citizens stand together and advance an agenda that brings both men and women to the table to discuss the critical issues that affect our country? So we are calling on everyone to come and join us so that we can debate, reflect. What more do we need to do? How do we strategize for the future? How do we bring the young, the old, the rural, the urban, the men, the women together? Because once we do this together, it is for the benefit of our families, it is for the benefit of the country, it is for the benefit of all of us. Because I think all of us want to be a happy and prosperous people, enjoying equality, justice, democracy. And so I call everyone to join us on this journey.
Thank you so much, Patricia. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and happy Women's Day.
Happy Women's Day to you too.
Thank you.
That is our strong message from Patricia. Thank you for being with us on the show. It was a great message. Thank you for all that we learned from you. So to all our viewers, enjoy your Women's Day. Catch us again next week, same time on the Civic Space TV on the Women's Show. You can also follow us on our Twitter handle, our Instagram, and our Facebook. Bye-bye.